So I told you guys I was probably going to have to do a little bit of trimming from here on out to accommodate for losing a couple of days. One day is when I got sick, right? And another day was for doing an extra day of Paradise Lost. So for Thursday's class, let's do what we were supposed to do on the 23rd. And that is, we're going to read the poems of John Wilmot, Earl of Rochester. We're going to read a poem called The Lady's Dressing Room and a poem called The Reasons That Induced Dr. S to write a poem called The Lady's Dressing Room. Okay, I've got if you look at the syllabus, the page numbers are on there, but those were for the 23rd. Okay, that was the day that we were supposed to do on the 23rd. So, yeah, that's what we will do for next class. In the class after that, May 3rd, you're going to read, that'll be back to the calendar that day. So you'll read Gulliver's Travels next Monday, a week from now. Okay, so that's, and then after that, we'll be reviewing for the final. So pretty light reading load from here on out. Gulliver's Travels is Gulliver's Travels is kind of long. It's about 40 pages, but it's written in prose, not poetry style. So it'll be a lot easier to read. That's the only thing in the class that we're really going to read in prose, right? Just because the 18th century kind of gave birth to prose writing, especially with fiction. Okay, so up until this point, up until the 18th century, there was never such a thing as a novel. Right? We owe the 18th century that. They invented the novel form, Gulliver's Travels being one of them. So, yeah, for 2 days of the 18th century, I think those are two good days with some good writers. Like, I'm very picky about the 18th century. I like my choices. I think you guys will too. The Earl of Rochester especially is pretty racy. 18th century is this century of manners and respectability. And this guy's like throwing F-bombs out in his poems. So the Earl of Rochester is fun, as you will see. So questions, comments, concerns, anything at all?
What was we supposed to read for the day? Those things you just mentioned is what I read. I thought that's what it was.
We read John Donne for today. John Donne's what we read for today. Remember, we did Paradise Lost first, and I pushed John Donne back. Were all the rest of you guys confused, and the rest of you not read John Donne for today?
I was confused as well.
Same.
What'd you read, Nicole?
I read, which one was it? I read The Lady's Dressing Room.
Yeah, I read that the guy that got his master's at 14, and then he kidnapped his future wife at 18. I think it's the guy you were just talking about a second, that Earl of Rochester.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so great. I think I can still teach John Donne without you guys having read it. Okay, so we'll just read through a couple of poems and talk about them and stuff. So we'll proceed with my plan. Because I haven't read the 18th century stuff in a while, so I'm going to have to reread it. So we'll talk John Donne today.
That's my fault, sir. I remember you telling me that now. That's apologies on my part.
That's all right. I should have probably sent out an email clarifying. I remember I said it at the end of last class, but I should have probably sent out an email clarifying. We'll make do. Let's turn to the Donne poems. They are, so Donne, just a quick note about Donne, he was writing about the same time as Shakespeare. So the end of the 16th going into the 17th century. So he was several generations ahead of Milton. Milton was about 2 generations after Shakespeare. Well, we'll do a couple of poems today. We won't just limit it to Donne. There's a couple of other really good Renaissance poems I'd like to go over, not just Donne. So today let's think about it like it's the end of Renaissance poetry. Okay. So let's see. So turn the page. This is Donne's most famous poem. I'll go over 2 Donne poems, 2 of the ones in the collection. There's 2 really good ones in this collection that are often taught in a class like this. Pages on page 1596. 1596. This poem's called The Flea. The Flea. So a note about John Donne, if you guys read through his collection here, he's known for doing a bunch of different forms. He does longer poems like The Flea. And I remember earlier in the class, Dale, you were asking about like longer poems, and they were rhymed back to back, back to back, back to back in couplets. You know, this poem, The Flea, is kind of like what you thought a sonnet was earlier. You know, it's about 27 lines or so. It's very long, but it's got back-to-back rhymes throughout. Donne also wrote some sonnets. We're going to go over some of his sonnets here in a second too. But Donne was a poet who definitely wasn't constrained by form. He wrote in all kinds of different forms. I don't know what you would call these. I don't know if there's a term for like a poem like The Flea, like a longer poem. But Donne is often known for, Donne's the poet of the sacred and the profane. Okay, the sacred and the profane. He writes a lot about, Donne is not hesitant to write about risque subjects, especially sex, as we will see when we read this poem, The Flea. Those are oftentimes called the profane poems. This is probably the most famous of the profane poems that we're getting ready to go over. But he also, in his sacred poems, he also has a lot of profane imagery in his sacred poems, which are called the Holy Sonnets. And we will read those. We'll read an example of those in a second too. So, in this poem, The Flea, I'll read it for you. Think as I read it. Think about like what is this flea a metaphor for? Right? It's got a very interesting and dirty message, we should say, to it. Right. So let's break it down. So he says, "Mark but this flea, and mark in this, how little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first, and now sucks thee. And in this flea our 2 bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that this cannot be said, a sin nor shame nor loss of maidenhead. Yet this enjoys before it woo, and pampered swell with 1 blood made of 2. This, alas, is more than we would do. Oh, stay, 3 lives and 1 flea spare, where we almost, more than married are. This flea is you and I, and this our marriage bed, a marriage temple is. Though parents grudge and you were met, cloistered in these living walls of jet, though use make you apt to kill me, that not to that self-murder added be, and sacrilege 3 sins in killing 3. Cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence? Wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which it sucked from thee? Yet thou triumphst and sayest that thou findest not thyself nor me the weaker now. 'Tis true, then learn how false fears be. Just so much honor when thou yieldest to me will waste as this flea's death took life from thee. So, one of you guys tell me what's going on in this poem. What's this poem about, content-wise?
I think the talking about two mingling bloods to me made me think of how in the Bible it talks about not mixing, two different kinds, whether it's fabric or planting two different kinds of crops in the same field and whatnot. That's what it made me think of. But the rest of it, I don't know. I'm skimming through it again.
You're on the right track there, Nicole. In the
Sounds like
Renaissance,
two.
go ahead, Dale.
Sorry, is it like just two people corrupting each other through I guess like a drop of blood? I mean, once you start mingling, it confuses with each other.
Yeah, in the Renaissance, they thought that sex, during the process of sex, they thought that you mingle like the bodily fluids that were mixed together. They thought that was blood, right? Of course, that's what they thought. They thought of like sperm like it was blood, right? So whenever two people make a baby or whatever, right? Their blood mixes together, right? Think about it like genes, right? Blood and genes. They're kind of the same thing here. If we're using our modern understanding of the body. So basically, he's saying here that in their bed, as they're having sex, right, the flea takes a bite from both of them, right? It sucks a little bit of blood from both of them. And at that point, it becomes almost sacrilegious to kill the flea, right? Because the flea now has blood. The flea now has the sacred blood of both vessels here, right? Killing the flea would almost be like killing your own child, right? Just because it sucks the blood from the two. That's where we get their last stanza, right? Wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that deep which it sucked from thee? Yet thou triumphst and sayest that thou findest not thyself, nor me the weaker now.
That also plays into like line 10 where it says 3 lives and 1 flea spare, because you have the life of the 2 people that it took blood from, and then the third, which it kind of embodies as the 2 bloods mix.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. The flea embodies 3 lives, its own and those 2. It says here in the notes that this Donne sort of adapted the idea for this poem from an Ovid poem. Of course, Ovid's an ancient Roman poet. A lot of what we know of from mythology today, we owe to Ovid for writing it down in his Metamorphoses. But evidently, Donne adapt. I haven't read the Ovid original, but evidently he adapted this idea from Ovid. What do you guys think? Or go ahead, Nicole.
I was thinking, I know this isn't like a really prevalent theme in it, but could it also be kind of like all life is sacred?
What do the rest of you guys think about Nicole's question?
I'm just wondering if this is he has some odd fascination with fleas, or if that's just a stand-in and it's literally just about blood, and the flea just happens to be there, and it's you know now it has both of them in it. I don't know. The flea's just it's kind of weird for me.
Right.
Another thought that I kind of had is like any creature that's dependent on humans could honestly kind of be viewed as like a, I don't know, metaphorical child, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right to point that out, Nicole. And the flea is a thing that we're normally repulsed by, right? It's something we're normally repulsed by. Like we definitely don't want fleas in our beds, right? But you can kind of imagine back then, especially, like that was probably pretty common. So fleas
Was
are an
that around
animal.
the time of the bubonic plague?
There were bouts of plague that spread here and there, but no, the plague was more a couple centuries earlier during
Okay, were
the
they aware that like fleas are what gave it to the rats and then the rats are what gave it to people?
I don't at this time period. I don't think they were aware of that. That's something that historians later deduced. I don't think that was something that they were aware of then. They were aware that it was spread disease and stuff, but I don't know if they were aware that it spread the bubonic plague or not. They thought it was more rats that spread the plague. Rats were just a vessel that carried the fleas around, right? More or less.
But anybody that's ever had the pleasure of dealing with fleas properly, man, me and one of my exes had a dog together in an apartment. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I had to nuke that place like twice, and then still I would like not fantasy, but have illusions that they were still there, and it was awful.
The worst
Right.
ones are the orange ones, sand fleas or whatever. God, them things suck.
Hey, they're resilient too. You can like catch one and like try to smash it between your like. They're tough.
Yeah, this message of all life being sacred, Nicole, that you point out, this isn't really a idea that Christianity espouses.
It's
This
more of
is
an Eastern culture thing, isn't it?
yeah, this is definitely more Eastern in its worldview.
I'm also thinking reading like right line 19 to 24. It's also like where it says, in blood of innocence, wherein could this flea be guilty, except in the drop which is sucked from thee? It's also kind of making me think like it can't be blamed for its nature. You know, its nature is to drink blood and that's how it survives. And we shouldn't despise things for simply doing what they're made to do, I guess you could say.
Right?
There's some deep wisdom in that, Nicole. You're right.
Yeah, so we're kind of reading the flea then from an ecological point of view here, right? We talk about ecological ways of looking at literature. We're doing exactly that with our conversation here. Yeah, this is a famous one. That's often you can't really take this class without talking about this poem. It's one of those iconic ones. Um, so this we'll go over this one as an example of the sacred of the profane, right? Exchanging of bodily fluids and the flea sucking the bodily fluids and then becoming a entity all on its own.
If this was considered risque, I would love to see what they would think about modern day stuff.
Well, next class, you'll see some definite risque stuff from the Earl of Rochester. So brace yourself. Yeah, it was about that time period that the F word kind of started, like in the 18th century. Like before that, it wasn't used. Like that's a word that was invented around this time period.
They say Samuel Jackson created that word. Are you sure?
I know that's well, yeah. We'll have to look it up, right? I do know that you can buy the Alexa that has Samuel L. Jackson's voice now, where it cusses you out. That's something that I want for my apartment. That would be fun.
Yeah, that's funny. Hey, one thing I'd like to comment on though, that's neat how the last three rhymes or the last three lines all rhyme together. You know, instead of just like back to back, they all three in his little. It's not a couplet; it's three lines, but I noticed that all of them, all three of the last lines rhyme.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. I don't know if he was following rules for this or if this is just free verse. But free verse is also unrhymed, right? Just like how that free verse is what Milton did, right? Unrhymed iambic pentameter. This is not free verse because it does have a rhyme scheme.
I don't know blank verse. Is it blank verse?
Blank verse and free verse are pretty much the same thing. Yeah, that's two different words for the same concept.
When in the second to last line where it says just so much honor when thou yieldest to me, is it referring to the flea when it says me? Because it sounds almost like it's referring to something else. Because then in the next line it says, will waste as this flea's death took life from thee.
Thinking about this, Nicole. I think he's talking about like the woman's honor here, right? As far as during the process of sex, right? I think that's the way that I'm reading it. I might be wrong though. Feel free to offer other interpretations here. You was getting ready to say something, Dale?
I was just wanting to ask her how she interpreted again. I kind of missed.
Oh, I just wasn't sure if in the second to last line, when it said thou yieldest to me, if it was if me is referring to the flea or if it's referring to someone else. But I definitely do see your interpretation there, Dr. Yeager. Almost as if like the flea drinking her blood was like taking her virginity or something, I guess you could say.
Right. Right. That's how I view it. Keeping up with the pronouns here, right? I think he's addressing his lover instead of the flea here. Any last thoughts on this? Maybe some of you guys haven't said anything yet. Kelsey, Kara, Hannah, any of you guys have any thoughts on this?
I read through these before today, but I think this one was one of my probably top 2 favorites. I can't remember which one was my favorite though, my first pick. I think it was one of the first few though.
One of the first few?
Yeah.
Yeah, the imagery in this poem is just so striking, right? It's one that you read and just don't forget. That's how it always was for me.
This is a thought that just occurred to me. Could this poem also, like, as a whole, kind of be, I guess, disagreeing with the standard of that time that, when you married someone, they had to be pure and they had to be a virgin and whatnot? Because when it says, how little that which thou deniest me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're on track here, Nicole. Like it talks. I think the idea is like the marriage bed is not this holy place, right? I mean, it is dirty, right? The process of making love is dirty, right? I think that's what the idea here is.
And maybe like virginity itself has the importance of a flea, I
Right.
guess, in the bigger picture of things.
Right. Yeah. Who cares about virginity, right? When a flea can suck the life from you, right? The flea metaphorically ravishes you before a man could, right? Interesting ideas here. Interesting ideas, to say the least. This guy, Donne, he later in life became a Anglican priest, funnily enough. Yeah, like throughout his whole life, he kind of struggled with his faith and stuff. So a lot of his earlier poems, he had sponsors for his poetry. Later in life, he actually wrote poems because he kind of had the payroll of being a priest after his wife died. So that was his career, even sort of a poet first. He married a woman who was a lot richer than him, which was a big no-no at the time. His wife was actually banished from her family for marrying this poor poet. So let's now turn to page 1607. 1607. This is an example of his holy sonnets. Well, we can debate whether this is really holy or not by reading it. So if you read through all these holy sonnets, there's two I'd like to go over. I'd like to go over 10. There's poem 7 and 10. But let's start with 10 first. One of you guys want to read it? Page 1607, poem 10.
I will.
All right.
Batter thy heart, three-personed God, for you, as yet but knock. Breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, overthrow me, and bend your force to break. Oh, yeah. Blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town, to another do. Labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason your vicery in me should defend, but is captive, and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to know, imprison me, for I accept you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me.
All right. So my question remains, right? First, let's come up with an idea of what this poem's about.
Seems
So
like it's a struggle of keeping your faith and if it's even worth it or not.
Right? The struggles of keeping your faith, right? He mentions that he's betrothed to God's enemy. Right? So I guess because of the nature of original sin, right? He's married to the devil, so to speak. Right? So we have a religious and a like marriage angle here. But he's addressing God in the poem. How is he addressing God? What relationship does he have with God in this poem?
Almost like a spouse, I guess you could say. Like, you get the sexual part where it says, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. And also marriage, for I am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie me, so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah, he's pretty much asking God to violently ravish him in the poem, right? Like he wants God to give it to him nice and hard, right? That seems to be not to be crude, but that seems to be what he's asking, what this poem's about, right?
It almost makes me think of taking away free will to remove the opportunity of sin. Where it says, take me to you, imprison me.
Right. Yeah, if he's imprisoned and isn't able to get out, so to speak, then he can't cheat on God with the devil, right? Yeah, this is interesting. He says, "Overthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new." He's like a usurped town that's ravished by an opposing army, right? So he's pretty much, like I said, he's pretty much asking God to just ravage him here, right? Which is, it's both the sacred image and a profane image, right? He's using profane images to espouse a Christian theme, a Christian conceit here.
This is really interesting to me because you usually get, like, carnal nature and sexual things aligned with the devil and with being inherently bad, but here you're getting it aligned with Christ and with purity, and that's just a really, really interesting concept.
What do some of the rest of you guys think about this poem?
To me, I think he's struggling with his faith, and through the love of God, he can overcome it. It comes off as a little heavy-handed, and you can get these perverse images in your head.
I agree with you there, Dale, and shoot, I had a thought, it just left. I'll butt back in if it comes back.
I know some of you guys might find this a little distasteful, perhaps. Right? That's a question. Some of you guys find this like high sexual imagery, talking about like your relationship with God, right? You find that distasteful, or do you like the idea? Some of the rest of you.
I think it's just vague enough to where it leaves your mind, like, to where it can teeter both ways, to where you could read it. It's a little nebulous. You could read it different ways.
I agree, Dale. I think that you could read it and probably teeter either way.
Right? What do you think of it, Kelsey?
I think that it's really capturing the struggle between keeping your faith and if it's like worth it. Which is pretty much what Dell said. So I agree with that. I don't. It's interesting that it's kind of like a marriage though, because in the Bible it talks a lot about like Christ uses weddings a lot in his parables in the Bible. So I thought that was interesting.
Right.
Another thought that I have on it is it almost kind of condones the carnal and what would usually be thought of as bad if it's done in, I guess you could say, a Christ-like way or for, your faith, I guess you could say.
Right. Yeah. We also got an idea of submission here, right? If you're going to love God, you kind of have to submit yourself wholly to. No, I didn't even mean that as a pun, right? Submit yourself wholly to Him. Right? So, the idea of a usurped town, right, sort of suggests that.
Was John Donne, is there any sources that like point to John Donne being gay maybe, or like some kind of sexual taboo thing? Because especially in the Flea and with this, we get a lot of like really sexual undertones and things like that.
No, I don't think he was gay. He was just like, I've never read any lit to suggest that. If you look through the scholarship, there might be some queer theory type of stuff out there. I don't know.
Can I add one thing to this?
Go ahead.
What Kelsey said a minute ago applies here. There's a lot of parables in the Bible that welcomes you like loving Christ as your lover. Like it's totally natural in that sense, in my opinion. So I mean,
I agree. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dale. Go ahead.
No, I was finished. I was just saying that I think what Kelsey was saying applies here.
I've also heard that anytime in the Bible where it talks about washing feet, that's a referral to sex. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just something that I've kind of heard.
I have never heard that. That is interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was a Muslim or Islamic idea.
I missed that, Nicole? Did you say washing feet's a sexual image?
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I've done a little bit of reading, and I guess you could in places in the Bible where it refers to that. And I guess if you want to turn it into that, it could be viewed as that, but I'm not sure if that's the inherent meaning of it or not.
That's an interesting thought. I haven't heard that either. Yeah, Nicole, to go back to your original question, I don't know. I'm not an expert on Donne by any means. You'd have to talk to a true Renaissance professor, not an American lit professor imposing as a Renaissance professor. That's your guys' experience. Right. I'm a vile imposter. Right. So I do know my Milton though. I do know my Milton. Right. But yeah, you'd have to ask someone who's more of an expert on Donne. But I'm guessing there probably is some scholarship if you search the databases and stuff that might be along those lines. But I think Donne was just a very outspoken sexual being, right? More than anything, right? Which Christians often don't do, right? So he had 13 or 14 kids with his wife. I think his wife died when she was trying to conceive his 13th or 14th kid. Right, so he had a really big family.
So maybe a sex addict.
Yeah, perhaps. Or I don't think he was a farmer or anything, so he had to support all them kids somehow.
That's that number 7 you was talking about. That's kind of anti-Semitic, ain't it?
Yeah, let's read this one. It's poem 7. So it says, "Spit in my face, ye Jews, and pierce my side. Buffet and scoff, scourge and crucify me. For I have sinned, and only he who could do no iniquity hath died. But by my death cannot be satisfied my sins, which past the Jews' impiety, They killed once an inglorious man, but I crucify him daily, being now glorified. Oh, let me then his strange love still admire, king's pardon, but he bore our punishment. And Jacob came clothed in vile, harsh attire, but to supplant and with gainful intent. God clothed himself in vile man's flesh, that so he might be weak enough to suffer woe. One thing I wanted to point out, I didn't point out about 10, is if you guys notice, these are Petrarchan sonnets. They're not English sonnets, they're Petrarchan. So look at her rhymes: sighed, died, me, he, A-B-B-A. All right. Satisfied, glorified, impiety, I, A-B-B-A. C, then we have C, D, C, D, E, E. So this is a traditional Petrarchan sonnet. It's interesting he wrote it in the Petrarchan form and not the English form. That might be just because Shakespeare was writing around the same time. So Shakespeare is known as the creator of the English form.
You think he picked this form so he wasn't they didn't like juxtapose each other too closely, and he could be his own thing?
That's an interesting question. My guess is, like, I can't give you a concrete answer here, but my guess is he was kind of like Sir Thomas Wyatt and just doing the traditional thing here. I don't know how much Donne knew about Shakespeare or anything like that. But to go back to your question, Dale, we're seeing some anti-Semitism here, perhaps, right? What do you? We haven't talked about that much in this class, but the Jewish people have never been highly looked on in British lit. Even if you go all the way back to like Chaucer, especially in Chaucer's days, like Jews were not even allowed to practice the faith in England. Like they were always sort of heavily denigrated. Of course, they're blamed for the death of Christ. And of course, they were the ones who convicted Christ, right? But they've taken the flack for it for 2,000 years since. You guys watch that Mel Gibson, The Passion of Christ, right? Mel Gibson especially does so in that movie. He makes them look horrible. And of course, then after that movie came out, Mel Gibson was taped saying some really heavily anti-Jewish stuff, which kind of hurts that movie even worse, I think, after he did it. It's a good film. It achieves its purpose, but it does make Jews look bad. What do you guys think?
I love Mel Gibson too. A lot of that was
Right.
Some of that was tough for me because it's hard to forgive some of that stuff. But I would say when you're drunk like that, and a lot of those tapes you actually say what you truly mean.
Yeah.
I can agree with that. I've said stuff that I felt but would never say sober while I was drunk.
Yeah,
But a thought. Sorry.
I was gonna say it removes the filter, to say the least, right?
Oh yeah. But a thought that I had about this, it almost to me, fucking mouse literally just ran through my living room. I swear to God. Oh my God. Anyways, though, this poem to me, it kind of feels like he's rubbing in the face of the Jews that he can be easily forgiven for his sins. Like, where he says, I've sinned, and only he who could do no iniquity hath died. It's like because they, crucified him and also didn't accept him as their savior, they can't be forgiven as easily as the people who have.
Yeah, you're right, and that's another tragedy when it comes down to it, is because that's their faith, and to them it's totally it's accepted in their culture, but to other people I don't know. I just don't like the idea of trying to like condemn an entire people because they don't necessarily believe your take on it.
Yeah, to build on what you said, Nicole, he's even in a way saying he's worse than Jews almost, right? Because he says every sin he commits daily, he is crucifying Christ, just like how the Jews did, right? Every sin you make, you're pretty much driving a nail in Christ, right? That's kind of what he says closer to the end of the poem here. That has biblical precedent to it. That image of every sin you commit, you're adding to the crucifixion, so to speak. If we think of the crucifixion like it's an event that takes place outside of a time and space, right? That we're all crucifying Christ every time we sin.
But he's doing it for us because I mean, if you really want to think about it, Lucifer's the reason that had to be done to begin with. So it's out of love that he allows himself to be crucified for your sins. So there could be some type of it could be looked upon with some, within a good way.
Right. Adds a little bit of guilt though, right? If you sin, you're driving another nail in them, right? It adds a little bit of guilt to the Christian conscience.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make my own sins make myself feel better for my own mistakes.
Yeah, these are some exemplary Donne poems that we read. I do want to go over a couple of more from a couple of other poets really quick. Since what the heck, we might as well.
I love trying to interpret poems and stuff. That might be weird to some people, but I think it's because a lot of them can be interpreted in many different ways.
Yeah, there's no objective answer to what any of these are about. We have one moment. Let's turn to page 1622. 1622. This poem on 1622 from Robert Herrick, To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. This is a famous Renaissance poem. You guys might have actually read this one at some point in your life, maybe in high school or something, because this one's iconic. This poem has the idea of carpe diem, right? Carpe diem, seize the day, right? This is very much an anti-Christian view, right? But it's seize the day, right? We only live once, so we might as well enjoy life's pleasures while we have the chance. So this is kind of the idea, the basic conceit of this poem. If you guys have ever watched that movie, The Dead Poet Society, right? I think they read this poem in that movie. I'm not as inspiring as Robin Williams, so I'm sorry for that, guys. Right? You're not going to stand on your desk and say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," for me. So I'll be kind of weirded out if you did, frankly. All right, but this poem, gather you rosebuds while you may, old time is still a-flying. This same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run and nearer he's to setting. The age is best, which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer. Being spent the worst and worst times still succeed the former. And be not coy, but use your time, and while you may go marry, or having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. This is well, a quick note about the form. Every other line rhymes, right? So every other line rhymes, but this isn't pentameter. If you guys notice, this we don't have 5 syllables and 5 stressed syllables in these lines. We have 8 in most of them. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. So this is called tetrameter. Tetrameter, right? When you only have 4 stressed syllables in the line. So this is iambic tetrameter, which is it's a shorter, pretty much just all that means is it's shorter lines. You don't have quite the pentameter length. But what do you guys think of the content here? The Seize the Day. Right? What do you guys make of this? Have you actually read this before? I'm curious.
Yeah, I've seen this one, but I love this type of idea. Like the idea, it's prevalent in a lot of like ancient Greece, because they would compare it to gods actually, you know, being jealous over our mortality, because that's what makes us beautiful. Because you live in the moment, and it makes everything more beautiful.
I agree. That's a lot of what I got from it as well. And also I got from the name, to the virgins to make much Tom, and also from the flower euphemisms, I guess you could say, that, oh goodness, I'm trying to think how to word it. While you're young and while you're in your youth, you should, live. You should not stop yourself from certain things just because X, Y, or Z says it's bad. That's kind of what I got from it.
Right. Why hold on to your virginity? Right. You only live once. Make the most of life. Right. It is a good idea. I can concede. Right. Like, enjoy your moments. Of course, this is about having sex and not being coy and all this stuff. Right? But it is an interesting idea, right? You only live once, so might as well make the most of it. I don't think Donne would agree in his holy poems, right? I don't think he would agree here. And the last one I wanted to go over is 1659. This is another famous Carpe Diem poem. I used the word coy a minute ago, perhaps on purpose. To his coy mistress. This is a longer one. This is 46 lines. Every line rhymes back to back. So it's kind of got this sing-songy type of quality to it. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long-love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the ride of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires, and more slow, as 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. I said that I pronounced it that way on purpose. Thy beauty shall be no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song, then worms shall try that long preserved virginity. Your quaint honor turned to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none I think do there embrace. Now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our town devour than languish in his slow chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one hall, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run.
I
Thoughts
liked
on
that.
okay, why so, Nicole?
I think this is my favorite out of all of them so far. And to me, the first half of it was, him communicating, his desire to have all the time in the world, to take things slow and to really appreciate and love. But then when you get to the second half, he turns the point and it's, well, we really don't have that much time. So what's the harm in being in a rush?
I like this too. To me, it just kept getting the stakes kept getting higher and higher, and he finally just says screw it in that. I don't know if you'd call that a stanza, the last several lines, but he says an out like amorous birds of prey. So is that like overly sexualized deviant birds?
Yeah.
It's because he's an older man. He doesn't have as much time as the lady does. She's this older man flirting with a young lady. So he's running out of time, but she has all the time in the world.
Right?
Oh, okay, yeah, I get that. What was it? While my youthful hue.
And then on the next page of it, where it says, and into ashes all my lust. So pretty much he's saying, while I'm still able to get it up and while I'm still able to, partake in all this lust, let's go on ahead.
Right? They didn't have Viagra back in those days, right? So he had to make the most of his time.
You're having too much fun with this discussion today, Dr. Yeager.
Yeah, I had to go over these two poems since today was kind of a loosely structured day anyway, because these two are very iconic.
I think it's interesting that, back in the time periods when these were written, it was totally normal to have large age gaps between like couples and whatnot. But today, that's really, really, really not something that's very prevalent, and it's something that's like taboo.
Yeah, that had economic reasons, right? Because fathers would often want to marry their daughters to an established man who could support them. And of course, oftentimes the fathers would give a dowry with the daughter too to make sure that taking the daughter on was worth the economic risk of the transaction, right? A mouth to feed, right? So they viewed daughters especially like chattel back in those days. They didn't marry out of love a lot of time, right? They oftentimes married out of necessity.
Yeah, so I wonder if, if this was written for or to a specific woman, if she would have shared his enthusiasm or not.
I absolutely disdain like those type of marriages. I just couldn't imagine giving my daughter off to a man that I knew she didn't have anything for whatsoever, just because it was economically the right, smart.
I agree with you, Dale. I couldn't imagine like being a 13, 14-year-old kid and my parents coming and say, honey, you know, we're really poor. This man's really rich, but he's like 60 years old. So you're going to go marry him. And, you know, you have to be nice and do what he wants. And then once you get older, he'll die and you'll be happy.
Yeah, if any of you guys have ever read any of the fiction of Jane Austen, right? Jane Austen, the famous 18th century, late 18th century writer who wrote a lot of novels about these types of plots, these marriage plots. Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma, all those books that are still widely read today. She wrote about this marriage economy a lot. That's actually what it was called, the marriage economy, right? Because that was an economic transaction. I'm sure some of you in here are familiar with Pride and Prejudice and stuff. I'm assuming.
I am.
Yeah. Another great novel I would recommend about this, it's a French novel. I actually have my students read this in my 230 class. Famous French novels about this subject called Madame Bovary. Madame Bovary. I would recommend that one. It's about a woman who gets married out of necessity. And then it's like she cheats throughout the whole novel. She cheats on her husband. Right. And then like it invites questions like, do you feel sympathy for her or not? Because she's a victim of this like marriage economy. It's an interesting read. It's I would recommend that one, Madame Bovary.
I've heard of that, but never read it. And there's one that I'm thinking of that is a similar subject. I think it's called Lolita. I think it's a Spanish novel maybe. And it's about this older man kind of proclaiming his love to like a really, really young girl. And it's uncomfortable, but also the way he describes his love is really beautiful. So you get really like mixed emotions about it.
Yeah, that's Nabokov who wrote that one. That's a 20th century novel. It's not too old. Or Stanley Kubrick made a film of it too in the 60s. The great Stanley Kubrick, who we've studied in our other class.
Yeah, I thought that had been adapted to film.
I've actually never read the film or read the book. That's one I know about it, but I've never read it or even watched the movie. So yeah, if you really want this old European style of marriage economy, though, read that Madame Bovary. It's a really riveting read. It reads really well. My students, every time I teach it, my students always love it. It's a French novel. He wrote that in the 1770s, around the time America was coming into being too. Doesn't really mention America or anything in there much, but you have to remember that in that time period, the French Revolution was right around the corner too. So there are some French Revolution undertones in there. Yeah, we read some iconic stuff today, right? So the two Carpe Diem poems, some two wholly Donne poems, and the one perverse Donne poem, right? So 5 really good ones we covered today. And so next time, as I said, we're going to read Rochester and 2 poems, one from Swift and one from Lady Montague, making fun of Swift's poem. Right, so reading actually is pretty light for next class. It's actually really light, so you'll be able to read all that stuff in probably 30 minutes. So.
The remainder of the things that we're supposed to be reading, are they going to have that really out front sexual undertone to them?
Rochester definitely does. It's definitely out front. So yeah, I would say so. I'm giving you guys the stuff that wasn't mannerly in the 18th century. I'm giving you the risque stuff, the few examples of the risque stuff from the 18th century. It's because that's just who I am inside. Right? Right? So I don't want to read this polite crap. Right? If there's no sex and violence, is it really lit? I mean, come on. So if there's any lesson to take out of this class, so there's that, right? If there's no sex and violence or Christianity themes, is it lit? Even Milton found a way to incorporate it into the Genesis story, for crying out loud. We had mountains thrown at each other and all this kind of stuff.
During that survey, when they asked me about the class, I'm gonna say, yeah, Dr. Yeager taught me about sex, violence, and Jesus.
Yeah. I'll definitely will bring that up next year during my promotion, in my promotion packet. I mean, if you write that, Dale.
That needs to be on the next syllabus for your next lit class: sex, violence, and Jesus, and how they coincide.
The next time I teach this class, for sure. This is one I don't get to teach too often. So next time I do, I might put that.
Even though you love American lit like you do, is this a nice little reprieve every now and then get to do this?
Oh yeah. Actually, when I was in grad school, I actually thought about specializing in Renaissance stuff. I had to make a choice, so I decided to do American. But I like this stuff enough to where I almost did my degree in this. I took a bunch of classes and stuff. So Shakespeare and Milton especially, I took a lot of classes on. The medieval stuff we did earlier in the class, that's probably the stuff I'm least knowledgeable about. I did take a grad class on Chaucer, but we read all of Chaucer's non-Canterbury Tales stuff. So all the stuff he wrote besides the Canterbury Tales, that's what we read in that class. Yeah, I did take a class on Old English too, where we learned how to read it. But could I read it now? No, I knew that's one of those things where as soon as you stop practicing it, you lose it. So yeah, I mean, weirdly enough, I did a bunch of the foreign language I took was Latin, right? Just because I like a lot of this stuff. Right? So even though Latin has no relevance to American lit, really, that's the language I took anyway. I like to think of myself as a very broad person with my interests.
Have you ever read any German lit? Because I feel like that, or not German, but Russian lit. Because I feel like that would be very interesting.
Not much. That's a subject I'm not too knowledgeable on. Yeah, there's lots of great writers, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and all those great writers. I'm not too familiar with any of them. I haven't read much of that. It's very.
Speaking of Russia, there was a recent discovery of a Russian Lord of the Rings. I don't know if y'all heard about that. That was neat.
Really? So, like before Lord of the Rings was written?
It was just a Russian take on it, and I don't necessarily know. I wouldn't. I'm not for sure on the details of it. I just know that it exists because it was trending a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that would be so interesting to read.
Yeah, as far as stuff I can teach this class. I can teach the ancient Greek, Roman, Western world class. I can't teach the second part of British Lit though. I can't teach that part. The second part of British Lit's is very boring, I think. Except Dracula and Frankenstein. Except those two, which I did in my other class anyway. But the Victorian era is not my thing. I'm not a fan. Dickens and well, I like Jane Austen, but Dickens and all those Victorian poets like Lord Tennyson and all that stuff. That's even the romantic poets kind of get on my nerves. And so the second part of Brit Lit is not my thing. So if you guys ever do take the second part, I hope you get someone who knows their stuff, because that is not my forte. Except the horror stuff. I do like the horror stuff. As Nicole is well aware, she's had to read all of it for my 102. All right, guys, that should be it for today. So we'll talk to you guys next time.
All right, everybody, take care.